Is there a power structure in the United States that could undermine its president, what some refer to as the deep state? Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Donald Trump campaigned as an anti-establishment candidate and promised that, if elected, he would go to Washington and, quote, drain the swamp. Since taking office as President of the United States, Trump has threatened to shake up the old order. But is he being undermined? Some of his supporters argue that there are powerful efforts at play to stop him, and they point to an entrenched structure with vested interests that may even be more powerful than Trump himself, what some are calling the deep state. But what is the deep state? Does it even exist, or is it just a conspiracy theory? One of those who's written about it is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald. During a recent appearance on Democracy Now!, he was asked to explain what the deep state is.
The deep state, although there's no precise or scientific definition, generally refers to the agencies in Washington that are permanent power factions. They stay and exercise power even as presidents who are elected come and go. They typically exercise their power in secret, in the dark, and so they're barely subject to democratic accountability if they're subject to it at all. It's agencies like the CIA, the NSA, and the other intelligence agencies that are essentially designed to disseminate disinformation and deceit and propaganda.
Glenn Greenwald there. Well, joining me now is Mike Lofgren. He spent 28 years working for the United States Congress, and he has an insider's perspective on how power works in Washington. He is the author of a book called The Deep State. Mike, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
This is a fascinating subject. The very fact that there could be a shadowy, unaccountable group or groups working to manipulate elected officials, even undermine them. What, in your view, is the deep state?
Well, the deep state is simply the natural evolution over years and decades of illiberal elements in our liberal democracy. These account for things such as a militarized foreign policy, secrecy and surveillance at home, and also an entrenched wealth inequality. Now, I want to emphasize, this is not a deep conspiracy hatched in the dead of night. It is the natural evolution of bureaucracies and how bureaucracies interact with the private sector. Fellows like Glenn Greenwald get it somewhat wrong. They're only thinking of the military-industrial complex or the intelligence complex, but it's much bigger than that. It includes Wall Street. It includes Silicon Valley. It includes large corporations. Even foundations and think tanks are sort of holding pens for up-and-comers, and also a good place to hang a shingle for a member of the deep state who's temporarily out of office. He gets a job, a salary, and a visiting scholar credential. So it's much bigger than what our newfound discoverers of the deep state say. And also, I want to emphasize, it's not just the government. For instance, regarding the National Security Agency, Booz Allen Hamilton is one of their biggest contractors. Mr. Greenwald's client, Edward Snowden, happened to be an employee of Booz Allen. 99% of Booz Allen's revenues come from work for the government. They could not exist outside the government.
Right, just to be clear on something, I mean, you mentioned a whole load of groups there. These are very disparate groups, you know, business, Wall Street, corporate groups, the government, military, intelligence, etc. You're not saying that they coordinate their efforts?
No, this is a more self-organized thing, and there's no grand meeting of the Illuminati where they decide these things. It's simply powerful groups that are independent of each other, tend to set aside whatever differences they have for another day, simply to entrench themselves in the status quo. And I would also say that to attribute this to conspiracy is just sort of Alex Jones stuff.
All right, okay, give me an example then. How would groups like this get their agenda on the table?
Well, for instance, look at Wall Street. Whenever someone talks about the 1% on the floor of the Senate or introduces a bill that would regulate the banks, they will flood Capitol Hill with lawyers and lobbyists to remind the people they consider their hired hands, in other words, the people they're giving political contributions to, what is their best interest.
So when we talk about the deep state, I mean, and the groups that you were talking about, they operate pretty openly, don't they?
Yeah, this is no dead of night conspiracy.
Yeah.
These are people whose names we know, whether it's John Brennan, the former head of the CIA,
right,
or Mr. Blankfein of Goldman Sachs. It's no big secret.
So if they operate openly, if they're not doing anything illegal, why should we be concerned about them? Should we be concerned about them?
We should definitely be concerned because they're usurping with money, power, and influence the citizens' control over democracy.
But citizens ultimately have control because they elect the people who carry out those orders.
That's true. However, you see, because people have become so cynical and apathetic, participation rates in U.S. elections are among the lowest in the Western world, among democracies. So, and also the fact that you cannot become a major party candidate for any important office unless you have money behind you. And how are you going to get that money? You're going to go begging from corporations. A member of Congress might spend 40%, up to 40% of his working day dialing for dollars.
If we look at the expansion of just the security and intelligence gathering apparatus of what you're talking about right now, it seems that it's expanded exponentially since the 9/11 attacks. Do we know how big it is?
It's very big. 70%, however, of the money spent by the NSA is spent on contracts. So it's not simply the hundreds of thousands of government workers who have clearances. It's hundreds of thousands of private sector contractors who have clearances. And just to be certain about this, we're not only talking about surveillance by the government. That has gone over the line in many cases, but there are laws that protect individuals. Maybe people think the NSA observes them more in the breach than the observance, but there are laws. There are much fewer laws to protect you from surveillance and data mining by private corporations for their own purposes.
Let's bring it right up to what we've been hearing over the past few weeks. There have been accusations that leaks that are critical of the Trump administration have been orchestrated by groups that could be intelligence groups, could be the CIA, could be the NSA.
I have no doubt there are such leaks, and I have no doubt that people in those groups were leery of General Flynn. I'm leery of General Flynn. And certainly his having misled the Vice President of the United States, the second highest elected figure in the country, and sent him out on national TV to repeat that lie, I think there's reason enough for him to have been fired without any machinations of the deep state. Right. And if that's not enough for people, he may have misled the FBI.
Why would they go after President Trump? He, despite what his politics may be, what his policies may be, he was democratically elected.
Well, that's an interesting sort of contradiction that a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around. I would consider Trump sort of the deep state 2.0. He is the deep state on steroids with a veneer of fake populism. When you look at his cabinet, it has more billionaires in it than you can imagine. It makes George W. Bush's cabinet look like a Bolshevik workers' council by comparison. So I think people are genuinely concerned about all his Russia background that he's not telling us about, the fact that he has not released his tax returns, and the fact that they may tell us something about who's financing him.
Right. There was something of a very public spat between the president and the CIA shortly after he took office. He called them names, and then there was information leaked that undermined his office as well. And that led the leader of the Democrats in the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer, to make a statement which was sort of cryptic in a way. He said, if you take on the CIA, they have 6 ways from Sunday, that was his expression, of getting back at you. Is that a tacit admission here that, look, you're dealing with a group that's more powerful than the President of the United States?
Well, I don't know if it's more powerful than the President of the United States. I know it is powerful, and I know he is taking on a very tough group. However, he willfully and voluntarily joined in this fight by comparing them to Nazis and denigrating the information they had about President Putin's interference in U.S. elections. And for that matter, he was openly, during the campaign, inviting the Russians to spill more secrets of information that was stolen from American territory.
But you know, there are checks and balances in this country against abuses by any group. We have congressional oversight committees that are supposed to monitor, supposed to regulate what intelligence agencies do. Are they doing their jobs?
No, I would say they haven't been doing their jobs. Dianne Feinstein, when she was chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, attempted to hold them to book for monitoring her staff when they were attempting to compile the report on abuses at Abu Ghraib and other intelligence sites. Unfortunately for her, the Democrats lost control of the Senate, and then that attempt was buried by the Republicans who didn't want to bring it up.
Because she also said something that was really surprising in the wake of those Snowden leaks, when we heard that the United States was monitoring the cell phone of the German leader, Angela Merkel. Dianne Feinstein said the President of the United States, Barack Obama, at that time, was not aware that that was going on. And in fact, she said her committee, the Intelligence Oversight Committee, was not aware. So who ordered those things?
Those have probably been a standing policy for decades. If President Obama didn't know they were going on, and if the chairwoman of the Senate Intelligence Committee didn't suspect they were going on, they're very naive to have been holding those jobs.
How does deep state activity impact foreign policy? What does it do?
I think it tends to set us on a certain compass heading regardless of who is in power. Now, I'm not saying there's no difference between the parties and elections don't matter. Emphasis changes. George W. Bush's foreign policy was different from Barack Obama's, and both are different from Donald Trump's. However, there will be a tendency for it to be the same. And you notice Trump is cutting back on some of his talk about abandoning NATO and so forth. You know, we could attribute that to someone actually sitting him down and making him understand that this is probably not a good idea. Or you could say it's the influence of the intelligence agencies and the deep state. However one may attribute it, I think we've sort of gone back to something approaching the status quo.
Why isn't the media shining a brighter light on what you're talking about?
I think it's a complicated issue. There are no heroes and villains. It's not something the cables can present as Democrat versus Republican. It doesn't shine a very favorable light, for that matter, on the American people, because in their cynicism and apathy, they've forgotten to be active citizens.
Mike Lofgren, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was good to be here.
Thank you. We are going to take a break right now. When we come back, I will talk with two other guests who also weigh in on the so-called deep state. Does it even exist? And if so, will it impact President Donald Trump? Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.